Hello there and thanks for joining me. I'm digital artist Aaron Rutten, and in this video I'm going to be reviewing the Logitech CRAFT keyboard for creative folks like me and you. So first let me give you a little bit of backstory. I've been thinking for a while about upgrading my keyboard, and the keyboards that I've been using have been these big clunky plastic things, and they're fine keyboards. They do the trick. They have keys, you can type on them, but there's nothing really professional about them or anything that's really geared towards creative people like you and me. And so I've been wondering, is there really a quality keyboard out there for creative people? And just about a month or so ago, I was at Best Buy just kind of looking around at stuff, and I went through the keyboard aisle, and I happened to notice the Logitech CRAFT. And what stood out about it is it has a little dial on it, which I'll show you in a minute. And that dial is kind of similar to something like the Surface dial or the Dell Totem, which is a little puck that you can rotate to control certain shortcuts and commands and commonly used adjustments in your creative applications like Photoshop. I reached out to Logitech and they were cool enough to send me the Logitech CRAFT keyboard to try out. And so I've been using it for a little while now. I've tried it out and I'm going to let you know what the features are of this keyboard and what I think of it. This is not a sponsored video. Logitech is not paying me to make this video, and all opinions expressed in this video are my own. So let's go ahead and check out the Logitech CRAFT. So here it is, the Logitech CRAFT keyboard. And as I mentioned earlier, it has this little dial, which they call the crown. And the crown can be rotated. And I can just rotate it like this to do different things. And I'll show you what it can do in just a minute. But it's right here. It's touch sensitive, so you can kind of bump it to toggle through different modes, and you can press it as if it's a button. It also has kind of a fluid mode, which just rotates fluidly, but it also has a ratchet mode that kind of ratchets in these different intervals. You can use this dial to make common adjustments like saturation and brightness, and switch between different blend modes in applications like Adobe Illustrator, Adobe Photoshop, Premiere Pro, InDesign, and a few other applications. You might also notice that the keys are illuminated, and if I move my hand away from the keyboard, then they dim automatically, and then they return when I move my hand near the keyboard. The lights will also change their brightness depending on the lighting in the room. The Logitech CRAFT also offers premium typing with quality materials. I'll dig into that a little bit more later in this review. There's also an easy switch mode, which lets you switch between 3 different devices. So for example, I can use this keyboard on my desktop computer like I'm doing now, but I can also use it on my Mobile Studio Pro tablet, and I can also connect it to my smartphone. The Logitech CRAFT works with both Windows and Mac computers, and I believe that it can actually work in between the 2 operating systems as well. So if I wanted to be using this on my Windows laptop and then use it on my Mac desktop, I should be able to switch back and forth using Easy Switch. Now you can connect with the Logitech Unifying Receiver, which is this little USB receiver that you plug into your computer, and that receives the signal from the wireless tablet, or you can also simultaneously use Bluetooth to link this to your smartphone or any other Bluetooth-enabled device. And what I mean by simultaneous is you can actually use the Logitech Unifying Receiver at the same time as using Bluetooth. One of the great things about this tablet is it's rechargeable, so you simply plug it in to recharge it. You don't have to put in batteries like AA batteries like you do with most keyboards that are wireless, and that allows it to be very thin and low profile, a lot like a laptop keyboard. The cable that it charges with is USB-C to USB-A. If you're using USB-C on your computer, you can just get a little adapter to plug into the USB-A end, and then you can charge it. Or you can just use a regular USB-C to USB-C charging cable. The USB-C cable just plugs right into the back here. Very easy to plug in. So it is still necessary to have this USB cable sitting around, and in fact, I don't really move this keyboard around a whole lot, although I could take it other places with me because it's very portable, but I just leave the cable plugged into this end and then just unplug the other end from my computer and just kind of leave it dangling there. You could very well unplug this and leave it unplugged if you want and store it somewhere else, but I'm just kind of lazy. So those are the basic features of the Logitech CRAFT, but I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into how it actually works and what I think of it. And so we'll start with the first category, which will be usability and ergonomics. So first I'll start by saying that the crown is very easy to find. You can just reach for the top left of your keyboard and there it is. You don't have to look down in order to be able to find it. And the crown is a great feature to have because it lessens the amount of time you have to click to find a certain command, and it saves you from having to hunt for certain commands in Photoshop and other supported applications. It has these nice fluid and ratchet modes. So as I mentioned earlier, it's very smooth when you rotate the dial, much like the volume dial on your stereo, but then it can also use a ratcheting mode, which kind of click, 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 click goes through the different intervals. And so the ratchet mode could be great for more precise movements of the dial. When you're using multiple applications with the Logitech CRAFT keyboard, it can sense which application is currently active and it adjusts to that application. As I mentioned earlier, it can pair to your computer or connect to your computer through the Logitech Unifying Receiver, or you can connect it through Bluetooth. It was very easy to pair. These keys are very easy to see in both light and dark situations. Now, right now, the keys are not backlit. The backlighting turned off automatically, but you can still see the labels on the keys very well. So if it's very bright and you don't need the backlight, still very easy to see the keys. However, if it's dark, then these keys will light up and you'll be able to see them even in a completely dark environment, which I really like. And so I think that's really great because with the keyboard I was using before, it didn't have illuminated keys, and anytime I'd be sitting in the dark, I wouldn't be able to see what I was doing. The hand sensors are very quick. I can move my hands away, it gives me some time, and then it'll automatically dim the keys, and then when I bring my hands back, it automatically lights up very quick, and I can see what I'm typing again. So in that regard, it responds very well. Now, as far as how comfortable it is to type on, these keys are very large and they're very easy to see, which I like. It feels very nice to type on. The keys have these little dishings, as they call them, or little dents or depressions in them, where it kind of lets your finger fall into that dip. They also have a nice, smooth, matte finish, where it's a little bit gripping on your fingers, but not too much. It's not like sticky or anything, but it just feels really nice and really smooth. It's almost like paper. And the keys are very quiet. It sounds a lot like a laptop keyboard. It's not a super loud click like your average keyboard. If I do that same kind of typing on my old keyboard here, you can hear the difference. Very loud, very clicky, very distracting. And this, you can still hear it, so you can hear that you're typing, but it's a lot quieter, a lot softer, and a lot less obnoxious. And as I mentioned earlier, it has a really nice, slim, low-profile design. You can see it's very nice and thin. Another thing that I like about this keyboard is it's very stable. It doesn't slip and slide around a lot like some of the other keyboards I've had. It has these nice rubber feet on the underside that kind of grip your desk. If you want to slide it, you can make little adjustments to it and slide it around, but it's not as slippy and slidey as some of the other keyboards that I've used. So I appreciate that. And so those are my thoughts on the overall usability and ergonomics. Now let's go ahead and move on to the next category, and that is software shortcuts. How does this thing perform with the software that it's intended to be used with? So I've gone ahead and jumped on over to Adobe Photoshop CC 2017. This is one of the supported apps. And we have this photograph of the ocean that I took open on screen here. Now watch what happens up here in the top left when I touch the crown. If I tap it, then I can cycle through the different modes, and you can see that little menu at the bottom of the screen in the center. With each little tap, I'm toggling between the 4 different pre-programmed modes that are available here in Photoshop. So I'm going to leave it on brightness here. And then if I rotate the crown while I'm on brightness, you can see I can easily brighten up this image. And then I'm going to tap on the crown to toggle to contrast. And then I can rotate the crown and I can increase the contrast, or I can decrease the contrast. I think I'll do a little bit of contrast like that. Tap on the crown again, and let's go over to blend mode and let's rotate the crown. And it made a little click sound, and that means that it's switched to the ratchet mode. And so now when I turn the dial, it's stopping at different intervals. And so what that's doing is that's cycling through the different blend modes here in my painting. And so rather than having to click through that list, I can just simply rotate the dial until I find the effect that I like, kind of like overlay here, so I'll stick with that. Now look over in my layers palette over here. What you'll notice is that there were adjustment layers that were automatically created. And I'll go ahead and just delete those layers so that we go back to how it was normally. I'm going to tap on the crown to get back to brightness, and then I'm going to rotate the dial and then watch over in the layers palette. You can see that once I invoked that brightness command, it automatically creates an adjustment layer for me. So that on its own is just saving me some steps. It's automatically creating the layer that I would normally have to click on down here in the layers palette. Then I'd have to select brightness and contrast. It's saving me that step. Now, of course, I don't want that much brightness, so I'll just take that back down a little bit. I'll toggle over to contrast. We'll add a little bit of contrast. Now you'll notice it didn't create another adjustment layer because brightness and contrast are within the same adjustment layer. And if I go to saturation, I add some of that, it's adding a layer for vibrance. If I tap again to blend mode, then you can see that it's toggling through the different blend modes. Now, if we go to some different tools, we can get different options. For example, if I click on this tool here, then I'm getting undo and redo. And if I rotate the dial, then I can undo. And if I rotate it the other way, then I can redo. If I click on another tool, then I might get something like zoom, where I can zoom in and zoom out using the dial. Now it's a little bit inconsistent here because you would expect to get zoom when you click on the magnifier tool, but you get undo and redo instead. And then depending on the other tools you select, you're going to get some different things. For example, here on the dodge tool, I'm getting size, which I can use to control the size of my brush. Or I can choose the hardness, if I want it to be harder or softer. And then I can choose the exposure. If I switch to my paintbrush tool, then I have control over the size again. Or I can change the hardness and softness, or I can change the opacity, and I can also change the flow. So it's going to adapt to the tool that you use, although it's not going to support every single feature for every single tool that you'd expect it to. You can customize the crown a little bit, but we'll take a look at what the limitations are of that later. So that's the gist of how it works in Adobe Photoshop. Let's jump on over to Adobe Illustrator and see how it works in that application. Here in Adobe Illustrator, if I tap on the crown, then I can get some different modes that weren't available in Photoshop, such as stroke weight. You can see I can rotate the crown and I can very easily and intuitively adjust the stroke weight. I really like that. I don't have to click over on the stroke in the stroke panel and then adjust it numerically. I don't have to adjust it with a slider. I can just rotate this dial. That feels really nice. And if I tap again, I can control the scale. I can make that box bigger or smaller. I can tap and I can reduce the opacity. Tap again. I can change the fill color, and that ratchets through a bunch of different fill colors. I don't know how it really picks the fill color. It must go through the swatches one by one or something like that. And if I tap again, same goes for the stroke color. It switches to the ratchet mode, and then I can change the stroke color, and I can go back to the stroke weight. It switches back to the fluid mode, and I can very easily make my adjustments to my element here just using this little wheel. Now if I click on a different element, such as text, and I tap on my crown here, then there's some other options for the text. So I can change the size of the text. Now if I edit my text a bit here and make a line break, and I tap on my crown, then I can control the leading or the space between the different lines. And if I tap again, I can control the tracking. I can make it wider or more compressed using the crown. And if I tap again, then it goes into the ratchet mode, and then I can control the fill color. Now that I've successfully made the world's ugliest logo, we can click on a different tool. For example, I'll click on the rotate tool, and then we have an option to zoom in and out. We have an option for undo and redo. And that's about it for the pre-programmed functions in Adobe Illustrator. We can also use it here in Premiere Pro. If I tap on the crown, then I get the timeline navigation or the jog wheel. Timeline navigation is a fluid mode, and it lets me just rotate to move my playhead. So I can kind of scrub through my footage here. If I tap again, then I get to jog wheel, and that goes into the ratchet mode. And what that does is that kind of sets the playhead going at a certain speed. And the more I rotate it, the faster it's going to go on its own, and it's just going to kind of jog through. And you can use this to set markers or kind of move through your footage quickly. But that's it for Adobe Premiere Pro. That's all it can control. And you might expect that it could do things like change the volume or adjust the lumetri sliders, but it can't, at least not at this point. And then the other Adobe app that's supported is InDesign, and very similar to Illustrator, you can adjust text properties and things like that. Now, one thing that's worth mentioning, in Premiere Pro at least, you need this extension active, which is called Logi Options. And it pops up a little window here, which sometimes appears on top of my workspace, and I have to move it elsewhere. But I believe this has to be open in order for Premiere Pro to detect the crown functions. So in my opinion, the crown is a lot more useful in something like Photoshop or Adobe Illustrator, but not so much in Premiere Pro at this point. Now let's talk a little bit about the overall appearance and design of the Logitech CRAFT. As far as how it looks, in my opinion, it looks gorgeous. As far as the durability, it's a partially aluminum, partially plastic build, but it feels heavy for a keyboard, but it's very solid and it stays in place. The keys seem to be kind of opaque with maybe translucent labels, so hopefully they're less likely to wear away with long-term use, like what happened on the A and the S keys here on my keyboard. I guess since my name starts with two A's, I must type A a lot, and I must save compulsively if my S key is worn away too. But you can see the paint wore away from just normal typing on the keyboard. My hope is that because of the way that these keys are built, I'm not going to have that issue with this particular keyboard. And so something like this would be a good investment because it's built with quality parts, and so it's going to last a lot longer. I don't know how many of those other plastic keyboards I've gone through. Now, as far as the size and the weight, the CRAFT is a bit heavier because of its aluminum build, but again, it is more durable than this plasticky one. The plastic one feels a bit more bulky and a bit wider, but they are just about the same width. The height of the Logitech CRAFT is 32.1 millimeters on the crown end and 9.90 millimeters on the keyboard end. The width is 430.3 millimeters, the depth is 148.8 millimeters, and the weight is 960 grams. So again, it is a little bit heavy for a keyboard, but it's nice and solid. Now let's talk a little bit about customization. How can this thing be customized and what can we do with it beyond its preset functions? I've gone ahead and loaded the Logitech Options control panel, which installs along with your keyboard, and it's essential for your crown to be able to function. So Logitech Options needs to run in the background. You can see here we can customize the keyboard. If we want to change all of the functions of these top keys up here at the top, we can change them to do just about whatever we want. So we could give it a different keystroke, or we could launch applications, or we could leave it as default setting. We could turn the brightness up and down, and we can go through some other commands. There's fast forward and play and mute and volume and all that stuff. You can also control the volume globally on your computer at any time using the crown here. Just as well, you can also tap it like a button to mute your sound. And then you have keys for calculator, screen capture, app menu, and to lock. And there's also the function key toggle. Because the function keys are also the same keys as these different command keys here, you can only use one or the other at a time. If I wanted to do, for example, Shift F5 to fill in Photoshop, I'd also have to hold down function in order to get that function. I can lock the function and turn that on and off using the lock key if I want to. And just as well, I can also click this little button here to use F1 through F12 as standard function keys. Let's take a look at more settings. Now we can disable the backlighting if we want to. We can have these notifications pop up on screen if the battery becomes low or if a lock key is pressed. We can also disable keys if we want to. And then we have options for the crown. Now, these are the global options. So if I turn the crown right now, it's going to adjust the volume on my computer. If I press the crown down, it's going to play or pause my media player. If I press and turn, that's also going to control the volume. But I could change this to do something different if I want to. I can go to More, and I can switch applications, I can switch desktops. I have a few different commands. I do wish that there was more that you could do with the press and turn function. And if we go up here in the top right to all applications, we can see that there are some applications which are supported. And so they have profiles already built in. We looked at some of those. Now I've manually added Adobe Muse, and I've manually added Corel Painter. If we want to add an application, we just click here on Add Application. There's some other supported applications, such as Microsoft Edge, but I could add. If we want to add an application, we can click on Add Application. Let's go to Corel Painter and let's take a look at what I've done to that. Now I've changed the turn feature to custom key, and that is Control plus plus. It says equal, but it's supposed to be plus, and Control plus minus, and it's in ratchet mode. And so if I jump on over to Corel Painter, I can use the crown to zoom in and out, because what I did is I programmed in the custom keyboard shortcut for zoom. However, if I wanted to change that to something else, I could make my right and my turn left be the left bracket, and I could turn off ratchet mode, go back to Corel Painter, and now if I turn my crown, what this is doing is it's making my brush size bigger or smaller. If you look up in the center of my canvas there, you can see that little circle that represents my brush size. If I want a small brush, There we go. I can have a small brush if I want a really, really big brush. I can crank it up, dial it up really big. Now I have a bigger brush. So the left or right direction can be set to any two keyboard shortcuts. However, at this point, there's no way to tap on the crown and toggle between the different modes. So if I wanted to both be able to zoom and to resize my brush, at this point I can't do that. We can, however, assign stuff to when we press down on the crown. And so we can do some global things like play or pause our music or mute it, or we can go to more, and there's some different features like cut and copy, double click. We could assign a keystroke. We could launch an application. We could open a file. So there's lots of things that we could assign. So in Corel Painter, I could hit this button and I could automatically save my document, or I could open a new document, or really whatever I want. And then of course I can customize press and turn. You press it down and then you turn it. However, in a custom application, all you can adjust is the global volume. So if I press and turn, I can turn my music up or down while I'm painting. But we can't customize the press and turn for something like resizing our brush or zooming in and out, unfortunately, at this point. Now, I keep saying at this point because this is just software, and this software is easy to update, and that adds functionality to your keyboard. So unfortunately, there is some limit to what you can customize for the apps that aren't supported. However, if you're only using Adobe Photoshop and Adobe Illustrator, then you're going to be able to do a lot more with the crown. So the last category that I want to talk about is room for improvement. I've mentioned a few things that I feel could be improved, but I just want to go through a few more. First, the crown can be overly sensitive when you bump it, and it can accidentally toggle between modes when you're actually just trying to rotate the dial. So right now, if I go to brightness and then I go to rotate the dial, and I accidentally bump it, it jumps over to contrast, and all of a sudden I've accidentally adjusted the contrast, and it's kind of hard to get it back, and then I've got to tap again and go back to brightness. So you have to be kind of careful about touching the dial. Sometimes when you go to grab it to rotate it, that registers as a bump or a tap. Unfortunately, it doesn't work on any slider. So for example, if I add an effect here for levels, for example, and I click on the levels slider over here on the right, and I turn the dial, you'd assume that it's going to move that slider, but instead it jumps on over to the brightness effect and it moves that slider. It would be really nice if there was a way to customize it to be able to move any slider. Also in Photoshop, it is a little disappointing that I have limited features for the text. I can, when I have the text tool selected, make the text larger. And I can click again and rotate the crown the opposite direction, and I can make smaller text, but I can't edit text in quite the same way as I can in Adobe Illustrator. So for example, I'm rotating the crown right now, and it's not making the text larger or smaller. It's not giving me the leading and the kerning options and so on. And it would be really nice if you could do that in Photoshop, because a lot of people use text in Photoshop. Just as well, it would also be nice to be able to adjust the width of a stroke on a shape in Photoshop. If I make this square here, and I try to rotate the crown, all it's doing is zooming in and out when it should be giving me the option to adjust the stroke width. I think it's great that you can add custom applications and you can customize the crown to some degree, but you need to be able to export and import the crown settings for customized apps. And as far as I can tell, there's not a way to do that within the Logitech options. You may be able to copy some of the files out of a folder and things like that, but there needs to be just a simple import-export feature. When we use the crown in Premiere Pro, at the bottom of the screen, there's those little white blocks that kind of show you which command you're on. And it does cover up the timeline a little bit, which can be kind of annoying. Now I know I could take my timeline and I can move it somewhere else, so it's not at the bottom of the screen, but typically in the default setup for Premiere Pro, that's where your timeline is. And it's usually underneath your video that you're working on. And so that's something that needs to be worked on. Maybe that's something that could be moved somewhere else, maybe to the top of the screen, or maybe there's a way to just make it less intrusive. And then just like in Photoshop, it would be nice if I could use the crown to adjust my lumetri sliders, to adjust my color, or to adjust the volume of a track. For example, if I go into audio here and I wanted to make the track volume louder or quieter, I could just rotate the crown to do that. Now these last two things are kind of minor annoyances. One is the toggling between the ratcheting mode and the smooth mode. You have to kind of hear it and feel it for yourself, but when you toggle between smooth to ratchet or ratchet to smooth, there's kind of a crunch sound. It sounds like somebody biting into a potato chip or something. and it's kind of a unpleasant sound. I don't know if there's really anything that can be done about that. It's not enough to make me not want to use the keyboard, but it is kind of an unnerving sound. Usually you get really worried when you hear that kind of sound in an electronic device. And my last gripe is that if the computer is left on and the lights are off in your room, or your keyboard is covered, let's say I put it here, sometimes I come back in the room later and the backlight is still on. So for example, if I put it on and then I move this over here, maybe the sensor is thinking that my hand is still on top of it. Now it's gone away here, and it doesn't always do this, but I have come back in to the room and sometimes it's still on, and that's of course draining the battery. Now you can prevent this by using the power switch that's on the back side here. It's very easy to find, and just switch the power off. And so that's what I've been doing to save battery when I'm not using the computer. It's very convenient, very easy just to switch the power back on. It's not very hard to do. And there's a little indicator here that will tell you how much juice you have. If it turns red, you know you need to charge it. And if you want, you can have something just pop up on the screen that says, hey, the batteries are dying, charge me again. So now I want to share my final thoughts on the Logitech CRAFT keyboard. It's a beautiful, well-built keyboard that has excellent performance, and it's very comfortable to type on. The typing is very smooth and whisper quiet, and the large illuminated keys are very easy to see, especially in the dark. Making adjustments with the crown is a great concept, and it works well in the supported apps, but the Logitech software needs a little bit of work. Fortunately, that could be an easy fix since the Logitech options could be updated to allow more customization in both supported and unsupported apps. If you're using Photoshop, Illustrator, or any of the supported apps often, then the crown could be a great time-saving asset. However, if you're expecting it to be as functional in the unsupported apps, you might be a little disappointed in the limited customization options. Even if you don't use the crown, the keyboard itself is still great, and it's much nicer than the bulky plastic alternatives. Overall, I'm happy with the Logitech CRAFT, and I'll be using it often, although I do wish that I could do more with the crown as far as customizing it. If you're interested in picking one of these up for yourself, there's a link to buy it down in the description of this video. If you enjoyed this review of the Logitech CRAFT keyboard, take a quick second to like this video. And if you're new to my channel, I'd love to have you subscribe. I have a lot more reviews of digital art related products like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.